good distribution practices. He's also a Master's of Science in Pharmaceuticals, majoring in Masters of Science in Pharmaceutics and Drug Delivery at the Ulster University in the United Kingdom. He's passionate about repositioning Uganda and the African continent to develop the required internal capacity to manufacture quality medicines at a scale that meets the need of the population, as well as the innovation of new treatment that solves Africa's key health challenges. Dr. Moses, you're welcome, and I'm glad you'll be able to join us today. Our third panelist, he's setting up. You should be able to join us shortly. That is Dr. James Atwine. James Atwine currently is the chief pharmacist at Ecofarm Pharmacy Uganda Limited. He has over 30 years of experience largely in the private sector. So his role are diverse at Ecofarm. He oversees the technical oversight, health commodity logistics management, and the M&E, the monitoring and evaluation of the quality management system that Ecofarm is currently implementing. James Atwine holds a Bachelor of Pharmacy from Makerere University and is currently pursuing an advanced diploma in pharmaceutical medicine from India. He is passionate about rational accessibility of medicines to the entire population in Uganda. Previously, he volunteered with HEPS Uganda, a non-profit organization focused on increasing access to medicines through community empowerment research and strengthening. So I know I invited Dr. Moses, Dr. James, and Dr. Paul to tell us about the impact of the supply chain, from the different background from which they come from. But before we delve into that discussion, I know all of us has been affected by the pandemic in different way, even at a personal level. So I'll start with Moses, just within a minute or two. How has the COVID-19 pandemic affected you as a person, not as a regulator at NDA, but as an individual? Yes, Moses.
Thank you, Kennedy. Of course, before the COVID-19 pandemic, I had personal plans, with targets of by such and such a time I should have done this or that. But with the effects of the pandemic being felt virtually in every sphere of our economy, there has been an inevitable, reordering of priorities, so to say. You can agree with me currently that for most of us now, the number one priority is how to push ourselves through the pandemic period and the aftermath, and also the uncertainties that may follow. So that influences my choices now on how I spend the money I earn, for instance, or how much I need to value the time I spend with my family. But also on the other hand, the pandemic has now made me realize how so clearly we are so dependent, so vulnerable in terms of our preparedness as a country to withstand the effects of a pandemic of such a scale, how much we rely on foreign commodities for our very survival, and including drugs that we are talking about today. So I've been personally challenged as an individual to step up as somebody who went to school and studied pharmacy, to actually start to think about what potential solutions can I offer as a person to our country and to our continent of Africa, and even the world at large.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. So just I think I forgot this. So we are recording this webinar and we're going to make it accessible via the YouTube page of PSU. So after this, for those who are not able to join us, that they will be able to access this webinar on the YouTube page of Pharmaceutical Society of Uganda. In addition to that, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to use the chat box. Just send a text. We are going to be, putting some of the questions to the panelists. Just make sure if you're asking your question, you include the name of the panelist that you're putting that question to. So I'm going to ask Dr. Paul also how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected him as a person. Yes, Dr. Paul, you can unmute yourself. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me here on this webinar. I think it is very innovative of the society to think of this forum for us to exchange ideas and the impact of COVID-19, both on our personal lives and professional as well. But I think for me, I would speak almost on three fronts here. One, I think as an individual, I think I would share the sentiments of Dr. Moses, who's spoken before me on the need to recast our priorities, I think, as individuals and what is most important in our lives. I think we all work very hard every day. We set targets for ourselves, but when you have a situation like COVID come by, you do realize that not everything in life is work, and you need to prioritize things like family. But I do wear other two hats in this particular response here. I am the Chief Stores and Operations Officer. I work with National Medical Stores, and we have a very important responsibility of making sure that the public health facilities in this country have the medical supplies that they need. Not only just need them, get them, but get them in the quantities that they require and when they require them. And COVID has presented us quite a very, very big challenge, because if I may be able to paint the picture a little bit, over the past, can I say 20 years, supply chains have drastically changed. We have left models where people try and stock up inventory in the eventuality of a situation like this. We have built a lot of reliance on the interconnectedness of the different processes, activities, people, and also the flow of information to optimize supply chains. And with the increase in globalization, you will find that many of the products that we consume at least have components from several countries, and you have not one country being able to satisfy its local need. So you have a lot of reliance on specialization, and countries choosing to work in areas where they have a competitive advantage. And when you have a scenario like COVID, which disrupts supply chains, you find that even though I may have expertise, or even I may have the money to procure items, I just can't get them because somebody who produces a component which I require is unavailable. So it's been very, very disruptive for all that. And on the task force, it makes it even a little bit more complicated, because everybody knows that COVID did not give us any notice. We have to scramble to get resources for the response. We have to scramble and get money. And COVID is not a problem that we can throw money at. We have a very, very difficult challenge here in competing with other countries in the world to get resources. These may be PPEs, these may be hospital equipment, ambulances. Everybody's trying to scale up their health sector, and we're all doing it at the same time in a couple of months. And you're doing it at a time when production of these items you're looking for is also going down, because most of the countries in the world are actually implementing lockdowns. So it is quite a challenge, and I am very excited to be here. I hope we shall have an engaging discussion, exchange views, and make sure that we can at least build on our wealth of information and see how we can have constructive ideas on how this can be resolved. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I think you've been very elaborate on describing how the pandemic has affected you both at the personal level, but also at NMS where you work. So I'm going to bring in James Atwine. James, Dr. James Atwine, you can unmute yourself, and then I think you joined us a bit slightly late. So the first question is, how has the COVID-19 pandemic affect you at the personal level, as James, not as the chief pharmacist at Ecofarm? Yes, James.
Oh, thank you, Kennedy. Sorry, I joined in late, but I must say, just like for everyone else, that we are living in really unprecedented times. Personally, my life has been affected in various ways: the way I live, the way I socialize, the way I eat. I have learned to quite new skills in this period. I have learned how to cook certain meals. Really, and when it comes to work, things have changed. I don't know when I last had virtual meetings at work, but all these things have come into play. And especially at Ecofarm, the way we work, we've had to review business approaches. But by and large, I must say that it has really given me an opportunity to be ready and more equipped to be able to react to any changes as they come. It was unprecedented, but I hope that if any of such pandemic comes, now better equipped, I'll be ready than I was before. Thank you, Kennedy.
Thank you, James. So my second question is going to be to Paul. Dr. Paul sits in the logistics subcommittee at the National Task Force. So more specifically about the COVID-19 commodities, like the PPEs, and also, some other medicines that are being used. What are you seeing exactly happening in the supply chain, especially around the PPEs, let's say the mask, the test kits? I think a few weeks ago, I think there was a headline in the Daily Monitor that Uganda Virus Research Institute had run out of the test kits for testing for COVID-19. So, I mean, what exactly are you seeing happening in those about those specific commodities used in COVID-19? Yes, Dr. Paul. You need to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, I got that. All right. Okay. There are quite a number of platforms we are using in different institutions to test samples that we have gotten from the field for the COVID-19 virus. One of the institutions that has led in the testing has been UVRI, and they have been doing a stellar job in making sure that we actually have results coming in. They have also been very, very helpful in helping us agree on the platforms that we can use for the testing of COVID. I think many have heard of so many countries. I think just a couple of weeks ago, we had a story of France returning nearly $400 million worth of testing materials to China. And these were mainly rapid test kits because they felt that the accuracy of the tests was very poor. So in Uganda, you have not had such a story. And I think this is testament to the capability of Uganda Virus Institute. They have been able to provide guidance on what is the most effective means of testing for the virus. And we have basically settled on PCR tests within the country. Now, because of the nature of the pandemic, you basically have almost every country in the world has understood that one of the corner pillars of an effective response to COVID is going to be effective testing of the population. We need to be able to isolate individuals who have the virus and make sure that they do not have an opportunity to pass on the disease to other people. We need to make sure that these people don't mingle with others. And because we are hearing cases of people remaining asymptomatic for very long, we are hearing cases of people staying asymptomatic at completely, almost 80% of the population, it is very important to quickly identify them. So testing is very important. Now, on the bit of UVRI running out of platforms, it is very difficult to secure all the resources for them to test. But they're not the only ones doing the testing. The way we're doing the testing in the country is that we have UVRI, which is doing a lot of the PCR testing. But very importantly, let's not forget CPHL, the National Health and Diagnostics Lab, the one in Butabika. They're also carrying a huge bulk of the testing as well. We've also introduced mobile labs in the country. We have these in Mutukula, we have some in Busia, and very soon we shall also be introducing others in Elegu very soon. We also have some tests which are being done at Makerere University as well. So as the intermittent supply of testing materials flow into the country, it is possible for us to run out of a few supplies for one of the different platforms that we're using within the country. But that does not mean that the country lacks the capacity to do training. What we've done is spread our risk across very many different platforms, as I have already explained, and make sure that at least one of them is functional at any one time, because none of these testing reagents is manufactured in country. And we are trying to make sure that at least for one of the platforms we have available, we always have the testing reagents. On the side of the PPEs, I think the challenge is also the same. And I think you have been seeing a lot of discussion going around of local manufacturers having an opportunity now to actually step up and start making some of these protective gear. It is not logical for us to think that we can get all the money we want and import all the supplies that we require. because the supplies are just not there. There is no capacity in the world to produce all the PPEs that the world requires to manage or control the pandemic that we're seeing here. So we are very much in encouragement of the efforts of government in trying to make sure that we can develop capacity within our local industries to make sure that at least for the basics that are required to protect the health worker or to protect the population, we have those manufactured in country. I know this goes back against the grain of some of the key principles of supply chain, which require us to concentrate on our core competencies and utilize a globalized, integrated manufacturing supply chain in the world, and make sure that we are buying from the country that can produce at least cost. But what this pandemic does here, as everyone has called it, is a great equalizer, and it has put everybody in the country on the same footing. Even if you have the capacity to manufacture, you may not have the raw materials. So people have got to rethink the way they manage their strategic stockpiles. They have to rethink the way they manage their supply chains. But by and large, we believe that once we start developing in-country capacity for PPEs, I think we shall gradually see the quantities available increase. Right now, we do have substantial amounts of PPEs in the country, but we are only issuing them where we believe that they are actually needed. Some people are actually asking for these PPEs for uses out of fear that they may need them in the future. And because this pandemic came almost without notice, we have to be very judicious in the way that we deploy the resources we have available. So on a constant basis, as the logistics subcommittee, we are quantifying the needs that the country needs. We are appraising requests from different health facilities, districts, points of entry, which have become a very important area. Earlier in the response, we had not given this much consideration because we believe every country would be doing as well as us with lockdowns. But we have come to learn that our neighbors have not done as well as we have. And many of our cases now are imported cases. So that means that now we have to shift our response strategy away from worrying about how we shall take care of patients in hospitals, because the patients really have not materialized in the numbers we expected, but now we're seeing a lot of them come through the borders. So we have to make sure that we deploy now our resources to those points of entry where we believe these people are coming through. If we had been in a scenario where we had deployed all our resources in the health facilities, again, we would find ourselves in a very difficult situation. So it is very fluid with COVID, but we are keeping our ears very closely on the ground, and we're trying to make sure that we are as responsive as possible to the needs, and we appraise those needs, and we make sure we supply according to the need today and for next week or the week after, but not for months to come. So you will see that the frequency of supply for COVID supplies is going to be coming more on a bi-weekly basis. And by that, we mean every 2 weeks. We will not be sending in like the essential medicines where we send them for 2 months. So sometimes people may misunderstand and say, oh, we've received too little. No, we're only giving enough because the situation is very, very dynamic. What we anticipate to be a need for today changes very quickly over a fortnight. And, yeah. I think that's what I can say. If there are more specific questions in that area, I'll be very willing to answer them.
All right, thank you. I just want to bring Dr. James Atwine because he's from the private sector, and I want to ask him what he's seeing, with some of the PPEs, let's say the masks and the hand sanitizers that are, that, for example, they sell at EcoFarm. Are they, running out of stock? Are they seeing the prices going up? Are they seeing a lot of patients, trying to hide, as Dr. Paul mentioned, that some people want to get these PPEs and keep them for the future. So are we seeing at EcoFarm, where Dr. James Atwine works, are we seeing such happenings, like a lot of people coming to, to buy in large quantity and keep for the future? Dr. James, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you, Kennedy. At a very service delivery point, I'd like to say where I work at EcoFarm, we've been seeing an increased demand in health commodities for COVID-19. Stock of sanitizers, stock of PPP, masks, surgical masks, all sorts of masks. And as a result, there were limited stocks, especially at the very first instance of an outbreak in this country. Like you said, many people were coming in, panic buying masks as they entered into the first phase of the lockdown. And around that also, we are seeing hike in prices, largely because I think the supply could not sufficiently merge with the demand, with the wholesalers and all the distributors in Uganda. For sanitizers, we've seen a changing trend that many people, many local facilities have come up, manufacture sanitizers, to manufacture some masks, and as a result, we are seeing more equipment or protective equipment come from local manufacturers. Of course, at first, because of so many entrants on the market, there was a challenge in quality. There were so many masks that were probably produced in a rush. But luckily, regulators have since sunk into action. We've seen NDA, UNBS come to approve some of these facilities to manufacture sanitizers and many related items. I think COVID-19 has shown us that if only we can build our capabilities, even have some potential to develop quality supply chain solutions at an affordable cost locally. There is a great potential in the development of local suppliers to mitigate against such risks that have happened. I wish Dr. Okware there in NMS, if some of these public procurement laws could be aligned to support the local manufacturers. I think in these times where every country is catering for its needs first, then Ugandans have shown that they can also swing in and follow the same train. So at the moment, again, because of the increase in local production, they seem to be sufficient stocks for masks, especially the surgical masks, the sanitizers, and of course that has come with a lowering in prices. The only challenge that is in private sector we are facing really very sophisticated PPPs, talk of the N95 masks, and maybe some other health commodities or medicines that are being reported to work for COVID-19. But in terms of these low capacity items, the surgical masks, the sanitizers, we seem to be covered at the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. James Atwine. So I think Moses has got maybe a technical problem. He's going to rejoin us shortly. But I want to, Dr. Moses is here. Yes, Moses, you work at National Drug Authority. So more broadly, other than the COVID-19 commodities, what are you seeing happening with with the supply chain of the other medicines? Yes, COVID is there, but patients are people are still suffering from HIV, malaria, TB. We still have hypertensive patients who need to refill their prescription medicine. So we also need to be aware of of those other patients who need that medicine. So from a regulator's perspective, what are you seeing happening with the supply chain of the other medicines? Yes, Dr. Moses.
Thank you, Kennedy. From a regulator perspective, I also want to, first of all, comment very briefly on the COVID commodities. We have witnessed very serious trends from around February till now in terms of the demand for COVID-specific commodities like masks and some drugs which were being suggested to be clinically effective in the management of COVID, as well as test kits. Of course, the test kits demand has been largely government-driven because the testing currently is being done by government. But the other commodities, primarily for the private sector, have been masks, which have been highly demanded. And in response, because with demand, with high demand comes in also other risks like unscrupulous people who want to bring in substandard products. So as NDA, we have had to come in and propose additional controls. We published a guideline on masks, which was shared with all stakeholders. We now require that all importers of masks import them from facilities that have an ISO 13485 certification for medical device manufacturing. And each of those masks has to be accompanied by a certificate of conformity or a declaration of conformity, or a test report that can be traceable to an international standard. Because that's, at the moment, that is the way we can, that is the measure at the moment that we can base on, in addition to other measures like physical inspection, physical checking of these masks at the ports of entry. Then on the non-COVID commodities, right now I wouldn't say that we are, from a regulatory perspective, that we are seeing serious shocks as yet. But I suspect that we may feel some shaking in the next few months, because since February, there has been a sharp decline in the number of new marketing authorization applications. For instance, if you are to go by that indicator, it means that we have fewer drugs or fewer customers interested in pursuing the Ugandan market at the moment. And also, the processes that lead to granting of marketing authorization for new products, for instance, inspections that lead to approval of facilities, are not happening, meaning that some manufacturers have to wait for some time before they can bring products onto the market. So some of these, you may not get the effects happening immediately or feeling them right now, but there may be an impact on businesses or Ugandan pharmaceutical companies that may have invested in registering products, and then there's been delays associated to the pandemic. But there has been some few cases of drug shortages, which we have tried to mitigate using the available legal provisions for allowing importers to bring in products into the market, even though they are not registered, to meet emergency and extraordinary circumstances. So a few cases, though, those are only a few cases. Kennedy.
Yes, thank you. So at this point, I also like to invite Dr. Paul Okware. Other than the non-COVID, other than the COVID-19 commodities, NMS is expected to continue with this routine supplies of the health facilities. So are we seeing any shock or impact in the NMS supplies of other medicines to the public health facilities as COVID-19 impacted NMS ability to supply the public health facilities? Yes, Dr. Paul.
Thank you for that question. I think the greatest impact right now on the ability of national medical stores to have essential medicines delivered to public health facilities is almost non-COVID related. I think we are finding ourselves in an unprecedented situation where we have a global pandemic to deal with, and then we have the effects of adverse weather and climate conditions. We have had heavy rainfalls in the country for a very long period, and this has rendered some parts of the country almost inaccessible. We have had sections of roads washed away, and it's made it very, very difficult for some of our fleet to actually reach some districts. Even our third-party providers who support our logistics down up to the lower level health facilities, health center 2s, 3s, and 4s, are finding it very difficult to maneuver given the very difficult weather conditions. That is one thing. But also, COVID has also presented again another challenge because government has put in place some control measures to limit the movement of people to prevent contagion. And this has meant that we basically have a lockdown, we only have essential staff moving, and there's a curfew at night. meaning essentially that the work hours in a day have basically been shrunk down. So this is a difficult thing, and was a difficult thing for us to overcome. Took us about a week for us to restructure and get staff to be able to work within these arrangements, but that was managed well, and the orders are being processed from Entebbe. But currently, right now, one of our biggest challenges has been the very difficult weather. There are parts of the country where people have been drowning as they walk to work. We've heard of reports of people, especially now around even the border areas, drowning as they try to sneak into the country. And this effect is not only limited to them, it also affects us who are trying to get product out there. On the availability of the products, NMS normally holds sufficient buffers for at least 3 to 4 months, some items critical up to about 6 months. So we are confident that we shall be able to supply out the commodities that are required at least for this financial year. But where we have uncertainty is on how long COVID is here with us and how long it will disrupt supply chains. It's a bit like having food in your house and you hoard it for a month, but food doesn't last forever. At the end of the day, you either have to consume it or it will perish, and that is the same condition we are faced with here. Commodity security is something we take very seriously, but it is not built in the buffers that we have available in our very big warehouse. It is heavily reliant on the efficient management of the supply chain, which are those organizations and activities and the information that all go towards making a product available at the point where it is required, in this case, that being the health facility. So we have to resolve all those issues within those organizations, within those activities, within those people, and also the accuracy of the information coming through for us to have an efficient supply chain. So yes, it's been a challenge, but I think for now, we have everything under control. But this persistent pressure on supplies being able to come into the country may present, again, a bigger challenge. For now, I think these months that we have struggled with COVID is well within what we had planned. But if this goes on for 6 months, another year, then I think we shall start seeing serious challenges. So we are trying to see how we can work very closely with our suppliers to secure commodities from manufacturers. We want to appreciate from them what it takes for them to secure the supplies we need. And this is dependent on us trying to give them and articulate what we believe our needs will be in the current, medium, and the long-term future. So for now, I think we are okay. But our concern is for the future, 6 months from now. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. So my next point of question should have been on some of the risk mitigation strategies. And I know, I think Moses mentioned some of the, the risk mitigation strategies National Drug Authority has taken. For example, in trying to, maybe some products that are not registered, NDA is trying to fast track them getting into the market. But also, there are a number of questions from the participants or the attendees to Moses. For example, there's a question on how is NDA going to minimize the supply of poor quality masks to the public. This is a question from Joseph Subuga. I know you mentioned the bit of NDA publishing the standards for the mask. Are there other strategies NDA is taking to minimize supply of poor quality masks to the public? Yes, Moses.
Thank you, Kennedy. Yes, we published a guideline which was approved by the authority in response to that need, because at that time masks were flooding the market from various sources, both local and international, and these were not passing through certain controls by that time, as it were. So in response to that need, we reviewed the various types of masks that were available on the market, performed some technical assessments, of course, with the input of other stakeholders, and we published that guideline. Now, that guideline looks at the different types of masks. There are those which are primarily for use within healthcare settings. The ones you may call the surgical or medical masks, or the N95 and the likes. and then there are those which are used in the community setting. Now, currently the body responsible for developing standards on masks as per the Standards Act is National Bureau of Standards. But we've been working with them because at the same time, the National Drug Policy and Authority Act specifies that any substance that has to be applied to the human body to prevent disease or treat disease is a drug and is regulated as such. So as a result of those two provisions, NDA works with UNBS. Of course, there has been questions from the public as to why UNBS develops standards. Yes, they are mandated by the Standards Act to develop standards. UNBS is also mandated by the National Drug Policy and Authority Act. So that calls for collaborative regulation of that product, and that is what is happening at the moment. So as I talk, UNBS developed masks for standards for masks for community use. NDA's guideline does not include community masks. The community masks I'm talking about are the ones which are made from fabric that you see a number of people wearing these days. The scope of that guideline does not include those masks. The masks that the NDA guideline regulates are those for use within the healthcare setting. So that is why you realize that UNBS's standard that was reported last week to be published by UNBS is primarily about the community masks. So in as far as the medical masks are concerned, NDA has already established controls, which I already pointed out, in terms of ensuring that whichever mask is to be used within our healthcare settings, it has a mark of approval, which is traceable to an international standard. And those international standards are well known for masks. When you hear, for instance, N95, the terminology should be clear that it has a filtration efficiency of 95%, for all particles that come in contact with it. So in as far as medical masks, the controls are there. We have also liaised with the Uganda Revenue Authority to ensure that all masks that come at our borders are adequately categorized in terms of the imports classification system, so that you avoid cases whereby we saw cases of traders trying to declare masks as textile, for instance. They'll go into the customs system and say, I'm importing textile from China, and then they manage to beat the system. But we have now closed some of those loops. So at the moment, masks that are coming into the country are meeting those standards. Now, there are some medical masks that are made in country, and we have had to request the manufacturers to ensure that the testing of those masks complies with those same standards that apply to the imported masks. Then there's been a lot of homemade making of masks. You realize, people are using hankies and things like that. Those have a number of challenges, and that is why the government has been proposing that masks which are going to be used in the community should meet certain standards. Otherwise, people are going to have a false sense of security using a mask that does not do any job at all. And those masks are going to be regulated with the help of UNBS.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yes, thank you. So I think you've also answered the question from Brenda, which is about how we can ensure that the PPEs, the surgical mask of the required standard. So James Atwine, so my question to James is on the non-COVID commodities, the non-PPEs, like the anti-diabetes, the anti-hypertensive, the antibiotics at EcoFarm. Has the COVID-19 affected the supplies of those of those other medicines, and what risk mitigation strategies are you taking at Ecofarm to ensure that you don't run out of those supplies that the patients would need them, whether there's COVID or not? James.
Thank you, Kennedy, for that question. Yes, COVID-19 is affecting supply chains, not only for COVID commodities, but also for other medicines, finished products, because there have been challenges in areas around logistics, shipping. All this to the service provider has resulted into temporary shortages of some key items, some antidiabetics, but at the moment we seem to have in control the risk that this COVID is creating. But because this, we only pray that this does not get worse as countries open up. You already have noticed that retailer prices for certain items are going up, largely because the supplier prices have gone up for many products, including vitamin C. At Ecofarm, we are really doing so much to try and mitigate these risks. We realized the need to create our supply chain to be able to take us through all these circumstances that are not unprecedented. And these are some of the measures that we've attempted to do at Ecofarm. First is that we were ready and equipped to react quickly to the changes and try and diversify our supplier portfolio, source the needed items from other suppliers that were not necessarily within our usual portfolio. But also, we have had to prioritize some high-risk supplier sources, not just by geography, but also by commodities. You mentioned of items like anti-diabetics. We need to be sure that at least our stores are well stocked for these essential items. And maybe when you go to other categories like the cough syrups and what, much of the priority has been on the essential medicines. Make sure that customers, hypertensive people, don't miss their doses. We are also keeping open communication channels with our suppliers to be able to detect their lead times and plan accordingly. But also, as a business that is in a chain of so many pharmacies, we are trying to do the business approach, the inventory approach around stores, such that the real service delivery points, the retail pharmacies, are adequately stocked at all times, vis-a-vis the earlier central system where you would have these commodities in stores and distribute. So we are preparing and giving the support to all the managers at these individual stores to be equipped to look around managing the inventory, turnaround times, and all that. But also, at some point, we've had to place some limits or purchase limits on certain items that are high in demand, such that we can maintain accessibility of these medications to all the patients that need them. We've also adhering to, of course, prescription guidelines. You know that there are so many medicines that have been mentioned to have effects in COVID, and there was some panic buying, customers walking and they want these commodities. But we've had to adhere to prescription guidelines such that we minimize the stockpiling that can happen due to these suspecting customers. But in the long run, COVID has taught us that we need to really diversify with our sources for all the commodities that we have, by geography, by category, and all that. We need to review contracts, of course, to mitigate such future risks. You can imagine that maybe in these circumstances, business is slow, but we still need to ensure that we are able financially to provide the products that customers or patients need. And we never foresaw such a pandemic. In the long run, we hope to review some of the contracts with our suppliers, to include clauses that can be able to mitigate such risks. And of course, like I said, we need to review our sourcing across multiple suppliers, both locally and in different geographies. We've talked of Kampala mainly being the hub of pharmaceuticals, but maybe that item that is needed by patients, majority of patients in Kampala, is somewhere in another part of this country. So we are looking into how we can establish relationships outside Kampala to maintain availability of all these medicines. But also the other aspect that we hope can enable us minimize this effect is to try and forge alliances with other pharmacies or other organizations. A case in point is the provision of these protective equipment like N95 masks, very expensive. You know, a mask goes for around $5, but we believe that if we can put resources together, private sector with multiple players, wholesale pharmacies here and there, we hope that we can, with such alliances, we can develop even new markets and be able to go through the right channels. That is an area that we have not considered, but we think that COVID has led us to start thinking in all these ways.
All right.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So I have a number of questions for Dr. Paul. So Stephen is asking, how sensitive are the current testing rapid kits in terms of sensitivity and specificity? Paul, if you have the answer or the expertise to answer that question on the sensitivity and specificity of some of the test kits for COVID-19. Paul.
Hope you can hear me. Thank you for the question. This is specific to the rapid test kits or all test kits in general? I think just to the rapid test kit.
Yes.
Okay, fine. The rapid test kits are accurate, but they are not as accurate as the PCR-based testing kits. Because with the PCR kits, you're basically looking for the genetic material of the virus. So that gives us an absolute answer. If you wanted something you would call or refer to as a gold standard, I think PCR is where we would want to be. And that is why we have taken a very deliberate decision here to make sure we channel all our resources directly towards PCR testing material, whether that is on the Berlin protocol, Expert Express, or the Roche Cobas tests. Those are all basically PCR based. The challenge with the RDTs, and again, because this is a novel disease, the technology has to take some time to basically catch up to what we want. We see a lot of the rapid test kits, at least from the literature, that the positive predictive value for those tests is slightly low. That is statistical probability that a positive test is indeed a correctly true test. That is where you tend to see that this test may not be as good as the PCR-based test. Now, if you were saying, I just want to do mass screening for people who are entering a train, or I want to do it rapidly, yes, that would be okay. You may be able to use it, and you'd be able to accommodate the ones who go through who are actually positive and got a negative test. But if you're capturing 98% of them, some may take that as being acceptable. But in Uganda right now, with the lockdown measures that we had, with the blocking of the borders, the airport, we thought it best to make sure that we identify all those people who we suspect to be of very high probability that they actually have the disease. And that is why we have insisted on using UVRI and CPHL, who are actually doing the PCR-based tests. I will say that the PCR-based tests are the best that we can have. They do take a while. That's why sometimes you will see delays in the release of results for truck drivers at the border. That's why you will see some of them saying, we've been here 2 days and we've not gotten our results, it's because it does take time. The PCR tests are good, but not as good. Even if you had accuracy up to about 98%, that means for every 100 people, 2 are getting through actually who actually are positive, and you're not capturing them. For surveillance, it may be good enough if you're looking for mobility within the population. But here where you have a population and a country which does not have the strongest healthcare infrastructure, that one person getting through is a risk we cannot take. And that is why we've chosen to go with PCR-based testing.
All right. Thank you. A number of questions for Moses. So Amos is saying at the internship site where they work, there has been a number of drugs that have been missing. And he's saying that together with his friends, they're working together with, together to come up with an innovative drug combination that can be used in place of side drugs. So he's asking, what are some of the opportunities in National Drug Authority and its partners that could make us, bring this drug combination to the market? So basically, they're trying to come with a new drug combination, and he's asking, what are some of the opportunities in National Drug Authority to try to get this product into the market? Yes, Dr. Moses.
Thank you, Kennedy. I want to thank Amos for the question. Now, National Drug Authority is charged legally with the responsibility of ensuring that local production of drugs is supported. And in that regard, we encourage similar ideas like Amos's to thrive. So one of the ways in which we work with researchers and innovators is we have a system where researchers can share with us the basic concept in sort of a one-pager of sorts, the basic concept of their idea. Then they share, there's an email where that is shared. The details are available on the website. Probably I'll be able to look that up and share the details. Then when that idea is shared and received by NDA, a meeting can be arranged. Previously, we used to hold these meetings physically, but now we have to, we can still interface online with the researcher and guide them on the process through which their idea will have to go from concept to reality. So we prepare them ahead of time for what they'll need to do in terms of fulfilling all the relevant regulatory requirements that are currently in place in the Ugandan market.
Right.
For such an idea, just a few hints. For such an idea, Amos may need to, have done the basic scientific study that proves that such a combination is worthwhile, and then based on the basic science of it, wants to propose, a prototype formulation that can be made maybe in a research lab somewhere and tested, in an in vitro kind of experiment. Several things that may lead to coming up with the actual product, which may take a bit of time, but still we have to prepare the person and encourage them throughout the process. So we have seen ideas that have been really more or less handheld throughout, and some of them are coming into fruition.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. So our time is also almost up. So I just have a few more questions too. So still to Moses, there's a question from Joshua. This is very specific. It's asking, what is the overall percentage and cost of medicines and health supplies imports in Uganda per annum? So in a year, how much does Uganda import in terms of medicine and health supplies?
Wow, that's a good question. We have a report that was published by the Ministry of Finance at the beginning of this month. And that report aggregates all imports as categorized by the customs classification system. So all imports that fall under the category of pharmaceutical products for the year 2019, the calendar year 2019, were worth 1.1 trillion Uganda shillings, which translates to about $264 million. that is an approximate percentage of about 70%, so to say, of our consumption.
Right.
Which is, you will agree with me that that's a very high figure, so to say, from that report.
All right.
Sorry to ask, you said 1.1 trillion? Sorry?
Yes, for both the private and public sector.
Those are imports alone, yeah?
Yeah, imports.
Excluding the raw materials that come to the local manufacturers, these are finished goods alone?
Finished goods. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. I know there's a question from Yona on how NDA is trying to minimize the risk of substandard, especially hand sanitizers. I know NDA is doing tests and regularly publishing the names of manufacturers with approved hand sanitizers. So a couple more questions. In terms, this is to Dr. Paul. This is from Innocent. He's saying currently we receive about 150,000 or 15,000 test kits for COBAS. The question isn't very clear. So he's basically asking how sufficient is this stock of test kits, and what measures have been put to ensure continuity of supply of the test kits. I know you hinted a bit on this, but more specifically, can you tell us, the test kits are sufficient enough to do the work for testing COVID-19?
Let me put it this way. We are testing no less than 3,000 people per day. So you can do the mathematics.
Yeah.
Coming through the Malaba border, we have at least 1,000 trucks every day. Busia is presenting about 800. And once you consolidate all the other points of entry, Mutukula, Legu, we have at least 3,000. We have a bit of community testing as well, but we have tried to focus our resources to where we know that we are getting imported cases. A couple of weeks ago, we did a rapid assessment in the communities just to check if some of the people we are checking at the border had been able to transmit the disease within the community. And from the different areas where we did this surveillance, we found basically no cases in the community at the time. That was 2 weeks ago, meaning that we had not had that much proliferation or contagion of the disease within the community. That's why now you find a lot of the resources for testing are basically at the points of entry. And that's where they're coming through. So 3,000 a day is almost what the number of samples we are taking at a time. This load is being shared by the different labs, UVRI, CPHL, Makere, the mobile lab who are doing the Gene Expert Express testing. And the 15,000 you mentioned is supply for almost a week. But we also have multiple sources where we're getting these items from. Government of Uganda has procured some. National Medical Stores is procuring some. Partners like UNICEF are supporting us. WHO is supporting us as well. We've tried and rightly made a choice to make sure that the testing is the first pillar in our response for COVID. So we're putting all our efforts behind them. So the 15,000 that he knows of, I think is a part of what comes through. But basically our burn rate is almost 3,000 a day.
All right, thank you. Our time is up, but we have still a number of questions. So for those that are not able to stay with us, if you're leaving the call, please fill the feedback form that you'll be prompted to sign to fill. So this is I think this James Atwine will probably best answer this. Is the supply of government masks as announced by the president more effective if we've done through the licensed pharmacy premises? So with the networks of pharmacies that we have around the country, basically Joshua is asking, can we utilize those network of pharmacies to distribute the mask, the non-medical mask? James Atwine, maybe in a minute, could you respond to that?
Yes, Kennedy, thank you for that question. I think it's something that government can look into, because again, you know that community pharmacies are almost the first point of contact for all patients in communities. And since we have people that are trained, that know the dangers of social distancing, I think if we partnered with government, we would enable this distribution in a way that does not put the patients at risk. I think it is something that we all have to look into, and especially the people at at the Ministry of Health. And of course, for me, it is about ensuring that these masks reach to everyone, and the distribution being done in a manner that is safe and does not pose risk to patients. And that's where I think community pharmacies, given their network of chains across the country, would be effective in this regard than the political institutions. Thank you.
Thank you. This is to Dr. Moses. There's a question from Taylor. So he's basically asking, he's saying he probably heard you saying that NDA is allowing some COVID-19 specific commodities being imported without being registered. So he's asking, what are some of these items that NDA is, 3 questions basically. One is, what are some of these items that NDA is allowing you to be imported without being registered? And then secondly, how are you ensuring that those items meet the safety standard? And then is NDA accepting these unregistered items from any manufacturer, or NDA has selected a few suppliers from which is accepting these items? 3 questions. I don't know if you have got them. Yes, Moses.
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kennedy. And thanks to Silas for raising that question. Yes, NDA has authorized some COVID-19 specific commodities. When we say registered, then that means we are talking about them being drugs. And in that particular sense, I would like to point out the fact that hydroxychloroquine at the moment is not a registered drug in our market. And in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a lot of interest in the drug by government, because government was interested in potentially utilizing it for emergency use under the Solidarity Trial, which was being run by WHO, connecting various countries within the response, so that a global pool of evidence is generated on what works best. So yes, hydroxychloroquine was imported for use within the pandemic, but it was imported under the provisions of Section 8, subsection 4 of the National Drug Policy and Authority Act, which gives a provision for that. Specifically, to get to the finer details, usually when a drug is not registered, it does not mean that it cannot be allowed into the country. It can, as long as there is need, and that need is established by law, and the law is very explicit. It requires that that need has to be an emergency or an extraordinary circumstance. For the case of hydroxychloroquine, with the minimal evidence that was available and with the need for the drug rising, it was approved for use in emergency circumstances. And for those cases, we have some countermeasures as well. For instance, the drug has to be authorized in the country of origin. It has to have marketing authorization in the country of origin, meaning it has undergone safety, efficacy, and quality evaluation in the country where it is coming from. We require that we have inspected the manufacturer. In other words, the manufacturer doesn't have to be some strange company that we have never heard about. It has to be a manufacturer that is within the companies that are known to NDA as being compliant. And in the event, because there are cases where NDA has not approved a particular company and is the only company that makes a life-saving drug, for instance. So in those particular cases, then the company should be approved by at least one of the stringent regulatory authorities or well-resourced drug regulatory authorities. And those are well recognized and listed by the World Health Organization. So some of those, the total sum of all those measures, in addition to port of entry inspection and routine post-market surveillance, all those combined together help us to build a case for allowing the product into the market in the kind of circumstances in which we are. So yeah, I think I answered the question.
Yeah, I think you've answered it well, and I think you've also hinted on, there's another question on how you're ensuring that these trial drugs are used appropriately. I think you've mentioned the case of hydroxychloroquine. There's a question from Aaron Luke, which is about the hand sanitizer. I think we have tried to answer that on the fact that NDA is now also testing these hand sanitizers and regularly publishing the list of the products that they have tested and just passed. A very interesting question from Brenda. I think James will answer this. What instructions are being given to patients with regard to disposal of plastics, example, cough-linked bottles, given that the coronavirus can survive on plastic for a while? And then secondly, how are community pharmacies handling these plastics if they are returned to the pharmacy? And how is this regulated? James, could you respond to that?
Yes, thank you, Kennedy. An interesting question over there from Brenda on the fact that coronavirus can survive on plastics for such a long time, and how the regulation of empty medication bottles is in this country. Of course, at the pharmacies, we are very keen. We have trained our staff about all the symptoms of COVID and all that. And as such, we refer every patient that we suspect to have symptoms related to COVID to appropriate medical centers. In a way, our staff are not equipped, or our pharmacies are really not equipped to handling patients with COVID. But in cases of the bottles and all the other medication packages, it is clear by NDA that these bottles are returned to a pharmacy. But in our pharmacies, we put some disposal handling mechanisms where we categorize this waste, and it is disposed of in line with the guidelines, both from safety, from NDA and the safety guidelines. So we are forced at the start of this pandemic to get isolation bins for any COVID-related items, be it a bottle that is returned from a patient as an empty bottle, and we isolate this this material for proper disposal. Yes. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So two last questions, and I think all of them will go to Dr. Paul. One is from Amos. Amos is asking, how would you predict the availability, affordability, and accessibility of essential medicines, especially those that need to be imported from overseas market? So that's the first question, predicting. Then the second question is someone anonymous is asking, when are they expecting the cartridges for Gene Expert? That's a question for Paul. I think the president mentioned that. I think the cartridges are still on its way coming. So yes, Paul, if you could respond to those two, thank you.
Wow, cartridges for Gene Expert. I do know this weekend we have about 15,000 of another consignment of the Cobas Roche testing material coming in country. For the Gene Expert, I would have to check the delivery schedule we have with our suppliers just to make sure it's accurate. I wouldn't be able to give you that offhand. I'm sorry on that one. But the consignment I'm most focused on is the one of Roche that I know will be coming through this weekend. At least it will take us through the next week to come. We should be able to cover all the testing that we have there. On the other question, how will we predict the availability of medicines in the period to come? I think the quantification of essential medicines and even for emergency supplies is an art that we have had to learn, dare I say, on job. I think when you get in some of these positions, you realize that you have to almost unlearn everything you learned in school. This is a job where you tend to basically learn everything afresh, because not every response, not every country is dealing with the same scenarios. So it is something you've got to do very deliberately. We run a lot of scenarios. Now, if you take the example of the COVID response, we have a scientific committee who are the main advisors to the minister, who is our champion for this response, Ahara, and His Excellency the President. They advise on scientific areas on how we should be approaching this. They also provide us models on how they think the disease is going to progress across time and within the population, the general prognosis, the number of severe cases that we have. And we take that and then we convert what they believe to happen given the unique circumstances in Uganda, given the unique controls that we have put in place, like the lockdown. And now that even we are planning to ease the lockdown, there are different scenarios now which are presenting itself. So we have to go back to the quantification. So we are looking at increased possibility of probably contagion of the disease because the lockdown is being eased. But now we also have to propose how do we think or anticipate other controls like the fabric masks are going to affect consumption, because with the fabric masks, as my colleague Moses had said, they may not necessarily confer sufficient protection for those who are wearing them. But if we mask every single person, including those we think possibly have the disease, then of course there is a decreased possibility, not absolute, no possibility, but a decreased possibility of the disease spreading. So it is quite an elaborate science. We take days, weeks working very hard, trying to theorize exactly how we think it will pan out. And we always try to aim at around 80% accuracy with our forecasting, and generally we're there and thereabouts. So I think that is the most I can answer for now. Beyond that, I would need to show you exactly one-on-one. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I think we should conclude. I think we have tried to answer most of the questions. So just in conclusion, I'm just going to run Moses, Paul, then James finally. Many of our, members or, pharmacists or healthcare workers, they work at the last mile. For example, they're in the health centers, district hospitals, those people that are at the last point of delivery for the medical supplies. What advice would you give to them? Someone, let's say, who is working at, the pharmacies of Gulu or Sorority Hospital, they're at the last mile. What advice would you give them on how to prepare for the shocks that is happening in the supply chain? If Moses could respond to that, then Paul will take it after. Yes, Moses.
Thank you, Kennedy. My quick one on that is that I think everyone really, including everybody working at all the levels of the supply chain, we should put our best foot forward in these circumstances, in the way we manage, the health supplies that are entrusted to our care, whether in the private or the public sector. Because whereas there may be disruptions here and there, the actual impact of the pandemic really depends on our good stewardship of the limited resources and the commodities that may be made available to us from time to time. So there may be disruptions, but we need to prepare right now, prepare mentally, prepare technically, to be able to be frugal with the resources that we have and put them to the best use. I subscribe to the belief that if we are unfaithful with little, we will be unfaithful with much. And if we are faithful with little, we'll be entrusted with much. So I believe, yes, even if we are, having colleagues working in the lowest ranks of the healthcare system, I think how best we utilize the little resources there determines our next positioning.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you. I'm going to change it a bit. I know Dr. Paul Okwara is the most senior here, so I'll let him conclude. So I'll go to James. James Atwine, Dr. James, what advice would you give to someone who is working at the last point of the last mile delivery, like health centers, hospitals? What advice would you give them on how to prepare? Yes, James.
Thank you, Kennedy. I think we, even at the very last healthcare facilities, health centers, including maybe a pharmacy in Gulu, we've got to balance the need for to balance the disruptions caused by this COVID and ongoing need for certain medications. and the ongoing need for certain medications. By and large, I ask people in pharmacies, in health centers to not stockpile certain medications, certain COVID items. I discourage them from the ideas of hoarding, such that we can continue letting people access medications. We have to know that even with or without COVID, there are ongoing needs for anti-diabetics. And also, I ask them to keep alert of any new changes in the supply chain. This can involve the idea of information sharing, both between the supplier and you, the end user at that healthcare facility or that pharmacy. Get to know what is happening such that you can prepare yourself in time to either have some alternatives, or this information sharing can also guide in the quantification and the planning, such that you have the needs for all the patients. So I think that collaborating with all the stakeholders, especially suppliers, is very handy in these circumstances, and keeping alert to know the changes in the supply of different medications, both COVID items and the others. Thank you, Kenneth.
Yes, thank you. Yes, Paul, yeah, you're the most senior. I think that's very true. And so in terms of advice to the people working on the last mile delivery, what advice do you give them to better prepare? And also your parting shot, so that we wrap this up. Thank you.
All right, okay. First of all, I'm very grateful for the invite to come and participate in this webinar. I'm not used to being called the most senior. I can't believe years have flown by like that. But it's very nice to see that you've been able to organize something like this for us. I think my contribution in what we could share with those who are on the front line is that the front line is everywhere. It is wherever you are. It's wherever you are able to make a contribution. And what we're seeing with this response here is that the One Health concept is one of the most fundamental aspects of any successful response. One Health basically is that concept that for a probably good outcome from a response like this, you have to have a multi-sectorial intervention. Health goes just beyond the health workers, who you may call the doctors, the pharmacists, the nurses, but we require a lot of the local leadership and even the other people who are able to make life happen. We have to have behavioral change. If we do not change the way we behave, the way we understand hygiene, and the need to wash hands, and the need to social distance, because we know how the disease is spread, I think then all these efforts will be in vain. I think one of the most important things is to see how each of us in the area that we are can influence that social change, can educate as many people, because at the end of the day, it's the way we behave that actually transmits the disease. And if we are able to get that message across, I think we will have taken our country together with everybody else a little bit further in managing this outbreak. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moses, Dr. James, and Dr. Paul, for making time to come for this webinar. And we have been so grateful. I believe people have learned so much, and hopefully they'll be able to better absorb the shock in the supply chain and wherever practice area that they're in. So our next webinar, just a few announcements. Our next webinar will be on Tuesday. We're going to be discussing the impact of the pandemic, especially on the pharmacy education. So I have a lot of experts within the pharmacy education field coming to give us their insights on what's happening. So as we conclude, I'll just ask my panelists to do the peace sign. So we have been doing this just to recognize the pharmacists who are on the front line. So the P will stand for the pharmacists. Paul, please. Just in recognition for the. Is that a P? Paul, is that a P? All right. So thank you very much. So thank you very much, Paul, Moses, and James. We hope you'll be able to join us soon. So thank you very much, and bye everyone, and stay safe. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.